Hey everybody, Ryan here from Cold Harbor Supply, and we have nods falling from the sky yet again, which means only one thing, and that means we're going to be doing a night vision housing overview. So today, as you can probably tell from the title of the video, we're going to be looking at the Nocturn Industries Manticore-R. So with all these choices and housings in the market, what makes this one kind of a next generation housing, as I like to call it? Well, I think it's kind of a next gen housing because it takes all the features from a lot of really popular housings on the market, like 99% of the features out there, and it combines them into a very well-made, with modern materials and modern manufacturing techniques, aluminum binocular. And this can be reflected in its very long scientific name, which I'm going to read to you right now because I don't remember it, and that's the UANVB-FCR. And that stands for Ultralight Articulating Night Vision Binocular Full Control Ruggedized. And the Manticore-R does encompass its scientific name really well. This goggle over here, this fully completed Manticore-R was actually built for me to use as a demo. I've used it for about 3 or so battery changes now, so that's about 50, 60 hours in there. It has some really nice Echo Plus tubes in there from Photonis, and I've used this in some Milsim events where the weather wasn't so good, and I did some rugged hiking with it. I did go bushwhacking that Milsim event for about 6 or 7 hours in the mud, so I do have some hours on this thing. It's not the hardest use in the world, but it is more than looking at a white wall and telling you if the goggle is good or not based on that. So let's get into the Manticore-R and what makes it tick. So when you get the Manticore-R from us, it's going to come in this plastic case over here. It's a hard case with the foam plucked out. It will also come with a spec sheet and a build sheet from us, which has your collimation reports and all that stuff to make sure that your goggle is built properly. When you pick up the goggle, the first thing you're going to notice is how sturdy and how well built it feels in your hand, because it genuinely is. Overall, they tried to reduce the weight as much as possible without sacrificing any of the rigidity, and that's kind of where this goggle strikes that golden balance of weight and strength. So traditionally, you have your metal fixed bridge goggles and you have your polymer articulating goggles. So you have rigidity and strength versus kind of ergonomics and, I would say, ease of use with articulating goggles. And the Manticore-R takes the strength of a metal goggle, a fixed bridge goggle, and the versatility of an articulating goggle and puts them all in one. So it does this by using 7075. It is also heavily skeletonized, but not in ways where strength can be compromised from at least my usage. I've banged this up a few times against some door frames. I've taken this out for walks. I've actually fallen on it a few times, and it hasn't skipped a beat. It's also using a mill standard Type 3 Class 2 hard anodize with an H series Cerakote. That's a lot of words, but what it really means is the finish is immaculately done. These also come in tan and green. The tan one we affectionately call the Tanticore. We haven't come up with a clever name for the green one yet, but if you do have one, put it in the comments below. And of course in classic black, as you can see here. So let's get on to the weight of the goggle. The Manticore is actually a very light goggle for its feature set. Now, it's not the lightest goggle in the world, but considering it's a full metal articulating gain control goggle, it does handle its weight very well. So putting this on our scale over here, it weighs in at about 563 to 565 grams, depending on the kind of battery you're using. Now, I've gotten into the habit of measuring goggles with batteries in them because I don't want to inflate the score. Let's compare this with the RNVG over here. It's still one of my favorites. Weighs in at a little bit heftier, 588 grams on our scale. So it's a bit of a chonkier goggle. Obviously, it's one of the most rugged goggles on the planet. I wouldn't really doubt that. But again, no articulation, and it's heavier, and it's made of metal. Another really popular goggle that you see on the market is going to be the 1431. It's a plastic articulating goggle. It's very feature-rich, but is also one of the heaviest goggles on the market. This goggle, even though it's plastic, weighs in at a mega chonky 620 grams with the battery. So it's quite a bit heavier than the Manticore-R. Even if you put lightweight lenses on it, it still can't really get down to that ultra lightweight that the Manticore-R sits at, given its features and its materials. And I can tell you for sure that the Manticore-R is going to be a more rugged goggle because it's made of aluminum. So what does weight mean for a night vision goggle? So first off, you know the saying, ounces equal pounds and pounds equal pain. Well, that's doubly true for night vision goggles. When you have a really heavy goggle on, especially with a counterweight, ballistic helmet if you choose to, gas mask, ear pro, all that stuff, you really end up putting a lot of weight on your noggin. Another thing that isn't going to be as obvious is that lighter weight goggles equal more capability. It means that you can attach things on your goggles and they don't add up to as much weight as if you were to use a heavier goggle, a heavier base weight, and put things on them. So right now, I put some really nice infinity irises on my Nod over here, just to show as an example. But what these add is they add some protection to the front. They're a SAC lens. They also add the ability to use the iris to change the aperture of the device and, acting as a day cover. And these guys, with the infinity iris, if I put that on my scale, it weighs at 620 grams. So that's not light, but that's the same weight as a 1431 without any accessories. So now that we're done the overall feel of the goggle, materials and weight, let's get into the feature set front to back of the goggles so we can do a deep dive here. So first off, it's going to be using standard mil-spec PVS 14 lenses or any sort of PVS 14 lenses of your choice. So you can have boom slang 50-degree lenses on it, you can have RPO ultra lightweight lenses on them, and those will change the characteristics of your Nod, whether you want the Nod to weigh sub 500 grams or whether you want to see 25% more. Going back from the lenses, there's going to be something called the infinity collar, and if you get your Nod built improperly, or if you're using for a long time, these can sometimes kind of shake out of place or they're not set properly. But ideally what the infinity collar is supposed to do is it sets your infinity. So if you have the lens backed all the way in, the Nod is focused towards infinity, which is how you mostly want to use it anyways. The stars are all in focus and all that stuff. The Nocturn Industries Manticore-R doesn't do anything new in this regard, so some housings already do it, such as the 1431 and even some AB stuff nowadays, but they use what's called a D-ring collar for the front. And what that does is kind of two things. First off, normally when you put a night vision device together, you have to screw the objective lens in and then you have to install an objective lens stop, which kind of looks like this little guy over here. And that does add a few grams to the device. It also makes it so if something happens to your front lens, you have to take the entire Nod apart, take the front lens off to check for debris or anything like that. What the D-ring collar allows you to do is, especially for us on a dealer level, it allows us to unscrew the front lens without having to take apart the inside stop, because that little flange acts as a stop for the lens so it doesn't fly out on you when you're using it. So that's really great. It reduces the weight and it cuts down on the parts numbers and complexity, and it makes it easier to assemble for us builders. Moving towards the bottom, you're going to see you have one CR123A battery, and that gives you about 25 or so hours of battery life. One thing that's kind of interesting about this goggle is that the positive side, where the nipple is, goes down first, and then the flat side goes out on the outside. It is really easy for on-field battery swaps. It's just a lot of goggles, and most people are used to the positive side sticking out, but in this case the positive side goes in first and then the negative sticks out. It's just something to look out for. The goggle will also have a double aught LEMO port on the side here, and this is a pretty cool design decision. Most of the time goggles use Fisher or just regular 0B LEMO connections, and those are rather big. So the double aught LEMO port allows them to have the same power delivery in a much smaller package. When you plug this guy in, and I just have a Nocturn Industries bat pack in front of me, and you plug this guy in, it still has the same locking capabilities. If I were to run this, I'd probably run this through the hole in my mount. Nocturn claims on their battery pack, which uses 4 CR123s, you'll get 96 hours of battery life. So that's pretty much a whole week's worth of usage on one battery pack, which is pretty sweet. Now moving on to the top control suite of the Manticore, that's where the FC part comes out, the full control. You have your power button, your IR button, and then your gain buttons over here. Now, one thing to note is while these buttons do have very tactile rubber covers and you can kind of feel out what they are based on what's in front of them, like, doing Braille, with gloves on, it's actually a bit hard to feel. But there's only 4 buttons there, so what I do suggest is before you put your Nod on your helmet, you get used to where the buttons are and you memorize where they are. Now, these buttons are really, really tactile. They have a pretty nice click to them, as you can probably hear if I put this to the mic. Pretty clicky, but they are a little hard to press when you have them in hand. Now, what I find is when you actually put them on your head, as I'll show you right now, it's actually really easy to press the button, because what I do is I just put my thumb underneath here where the hinges are, and then I press the buttons and use my thumb as leverage, and you can do the same for your other side, making this a very easy goggle for lefties and righties to articulate the controls, which is rather nice. Moving from the control side, the power button, you have to hold it for I believe 2 seconds or so for the Nod to turn on, and you're going to see actually a red indicator light for the Nod when it goes on, which is kind of cool. The red lights will turn off after the goggle powers on, so it's just an indicator light. Don't worry, they're not going to be there all the time unless you go to the illuminator, which is the next button. So you might notice in the front there's a little blacked out LED illuminator In the middle over here, that's an IR illuminator. So much like a PVS-14, if you're doing close map reading work and stuff like that, it does provide some illumination for that. And the way you turn that on is actually a little bit different. So it's not a press and hold or anything like that, and they probably did that so you don't accidentally power it on. It's actually going to be a double click. To turn it off, you just press it once and it turns off. So it turns off really easily, and it takes a little bit of effort to turn on because usually people want to turn it off quick, but when they turn it on, they want to be a little bit more deliberate with their actions. So after the illuminator in the middle, you're going to get to your gain buttons here. Now I have a few feelings about manual gain. So manual gain simply indicates that you can manually control the brightness of the goggle when the conditions are right. So actually when it's too bright outside, the goggle will, at least for our cases, our photonus tubes will automatically go down to their lowest brightness, and you won't actually be really able to see a change in the gain at all to your human eye. But if you're using this in kind of semi-dark environments, and you do want to clean up the noise and bring down the brightness of the image a little bit, you have manual gain to do that. Now, I don't really use manual gain because I live in Canada, and internationally, most of us get photonus tubes. So if you're in the US, you're using super bright Gen 3 tubes. I totally get it. Those tubes feel like they're going to blow your eye out. I totally get having manual gain to help you crank down the noise in this installation of the image to get a more comfortable image. Photonus tubes, on the other hand, already have a decently good, I would say, output brightness. And output brightness is not the sensitivity of the tube, so photonus tubes still work very well in low light conditions, but it's basically how bright the image is coming to your eye. So think of this as the brightness of your screen. In the dark, I don't generally want my screen cranked up to its maximum brightness like a boomer. However, I did find manual gain useful in one instance when I was using this, and this was when the sun was just setting in this event I was at, and it was really dark in the forest, but around in the fields and stuff like that, in the more built-up urban areas, it was decently bright. And I found manual gain useful then because you were getting a bit more of a noisy image in the forest. It's not that I couldn't see, it's not that it wasn't, good. It was just not optimal, let's say. So what manual gain did was I cranked it down all the way, and I was able to see into the dark areas of the forest and see around me. So for those situations, maybe manual gain is useful. I'm still not super sold on it personally, just from my context of use, but a lot of people want more control with their binoculars, and they have that there. Moving on to the top of the goggle, you have a very standard dovetail. Now it actually uses the same dovetail as the current gen katanas and a few other housings. One of the best dovetails in the market, has no issues fitting in any mount I've used, and it's very lightweight, so no issues there. Now, this is an articulating goggle, and I had some feelings about articulation because I was for a long time a fixed bridge maxer, so I really like to use fixed bridge goggles because they were really strong. When you drop the goggle in front of your eyes, it's just right there, and because the RNVG is a decently low stow goggle, it didn't feel like I was rocking my goggles really high up. And that was until I used the Manticore. So I didn't like articulating goggles because they're plastic. I'm a dummy with my gear. I've broken nods before, and I just wanted that rigidity and strength. Now, I didn't have the same reservations with this guy because it was aluminum, and I've seen the test that Nocturn do, and I know this thing is crazy strong. So I was wondering, would I like articulation based on the fact that I have a strong preference for fixed bridge goggles? And I gotta say, guys, even me as a fixed bridge enjoyer, and as much as I love the RNVG, the articulation is pretty nice, but it's not nice for the reasons that I would say people think it is. So I'm going to get into a bit of my use case here and my use philosophy because I don't want to just make this, I'm going to go over the features of this because you can read that online. So for me, when I use goggles, I don't use the articulation for looking underneath the goggle, and here's the reason why. So I find that if I'm using these goggles, and I'm actually doing some cool stuff with them, shooting and all that stuff, I have my hands on the rifle. And I don't really want to take my hands off the rifle to look and articulate stuff and then have to go back on and not have my full binocular vision. So what I do when I want to check stuff, instead of rolling up the pods because I find that really slow, I just look up like that, look at what I see, and then look back down. And I run my pods a little higher than normal to accommodate for that. Or I look to the side like this, and then I see through the side, and then I get back into my goggles. Additionally, a lot of guys like to run their goggles like this, which looks pretty awesome, and it's great for vehicles, which I did use it for, and this was very useful for getting into a vehicle. But some guys are like, well, you can aim down your sights like this. And yes, you can, but it's not ideal because there is a battery pod here. Even though it's a very low profile one, I did find the goggle sometimes getting in the way of things. I also did have a thermal optic on my rifle for one of my events, and I was looking through that thermal optic, and I tried to do this, and honestly, this pod was still kind of getting in the way, so I just flipped it up. Now here, in its most flipped up configuration, is where I found the articulation to be wonderful. And that's because you can stow the pods, especially with the Cadex and the chip, crazy tight to your helmet. And that just felt like I was wearing nothing on my head, which was amazing for when I was doing some hiking and I did not want to take the goggles off and I wanted to keep them to my head, or when the sun came up and I just wanted to keep them on my head. It was fantastic for that, and I did notice a huge difference versus when the goggles are out and when they're in, because the pod weight is brought closer to the center of gravity on your helmet, which is awesome. So as much as I love fixed bridge goggles, I will have to say, for this usage specifically, tight stow, these things are pretty great. This goggle will also feature individual pod shutoff. So some goggles, like the 31 base systems here, including the 1431, don't have individual pod shutoff. So if I rotate this pod up and I rotate this pod up, it doesn't turn off at all. So that might be a concern for you if you want to have some redundancy with your power off options. So the Manticore-R is a bit different, and it is like most modern conventional goggles nowadays. It does have individual pod power shutoff, and if I rotate this pod, you can see that it turns off and this one stays on, and if you rotate this one goes off too. So this is nice, not only for protecting your nod against damage, but also it prevents some backsplash on your helmet. So if you're rocking these on your helmet there, and you have other nod users going against you, they can see the backsplash on your helmet. If you have this feature, it turns off, so you don't have to worry about that. And this goes on to my next thing, which is the IPD stops and the pod tension. So Nocturn Industries has a pretty smart system, and it's called a soft IPD stops. They had a few iterations of this, and I really believe that in this iteration they nailed it. So if you look on the rear part of the bridge, you have two sets of screws. You have your inner screws, and these are the ones that are actually going to control pod tension. When we build these goggles and send them out to you, we're going to actually adjust this so that when you shake the goggle, the pods will not fall, no matter really how hard you shake them. Now, people think the outside screw is the pod tension screw, but it doesn't really control pod tension all that much, if at all. This guy is actually going to control the soft IPD stop on your goggles. So how this goggle works is, for IPD, for other goggles, some goggles don't have them, but most articulating goggles do at this point. For example, this one is using a 31 style IPD stop, and this just has a screw that stops the goggle in place. Very simple. The Nocturn is a bit more clever in its design, and it does reduce the profile of the goggle a lot. It uses these crescent half moon stops. If you've used a Nocturn goggle before, you'll know what I mean. But basically these, if you want to reset them, you bring them all the way up like this, and they'll reset, and your goggle will be set for a super wide-eyed boy. And all you do is you just overcome that a little bit with a little bit more force, and let's say that is my IPD. I think it's around there. When you rotate the goggle up and you bring it down, it'll have a soft stop at that point. Going over the side of the goggle here, you see the purge port, so that's where we would put nitrogen and vacuum test your nods every time we build them. These goggles are waterproof. I used them in the rain, I fell in the mud with them. No issues there. They work really well in wet and nasty environments. And on the rear, just to cap things off, in terms of external stuff, it just uses some standard mil-spec lenses on the rear. Again, just like the front, you can install any kind of PVS 14 lens on this and get the feature set that you want. So this is the finished nod, and this is the housing. This is the thing that we build your nod out of. And I do want to go over some of the features of the housing, because there's some really smart decisions that Nocturn made here to simplify the construction of the housing by reducing the amount of parts and to also reduce weight. So I mentioned the D-rings. Another thing, if you look on the rear, this guy uses a 4-pin construction on the inside, which is pretty interesting. So we're using an L through an Elbert tube that has a pigtail, or an EGAC. What you do is you're going to remove that, and it will come with some stickers out of the box that you basically stick on, heat it on, make sure it's nice and adhesive, and you plug that EGAC in, and then now you have basically a flat pigtail that you slide in, and now you have all your features that you normally had with that variable gain tube in a slim housing. So there's no housing bump like you see on the 1431. In many housings, they'll have this bump over here. That's where the EGAC and all that stuff would go. This one, as you can see, they just reduced the profile of the goggle a lot, so that allows them to skeletonize it more, save weight, save profile, all that good stuff. The same thing is with photonus tubes. So with 3-pin tubes, as there's a 4th pin in here, if you just drop in a 3-pin tube, it's not going to work immediately. You're going to need to modify that little pigtail sticker in a way for it to fit a photonus tube. But we do that out of factory for you, but it's pretty cool, saves weight, doesn't really do anything to you as the end user. It's just something to note of how it works. Moving on to the rear is going to be my favorite feature in terms of the actual design of the housing. And I believe all future Nocturn products are using this, and that's going to be the combined light pipe and tube retaining ring. So normally on a lot of housings, this is two parts. So you have a light pipe, which your IR indicator, your LED indicators go through, and then you have your tube retaining ring that holds it all down. What Nocturn did was they took those things to save weight and to save on parts and construction, and they combined them into one part. They basically made a light transmitting version of the tube retaining ring. So it retains the tube and it acts as a light pipe. And the light pipe actually works better than the standard light pipe because it doesn't just have a little light shining in the corner that sometimes you can't even see properly. It shines throughout the whole thing. So there's no mistaking whether you have the IR illuminator on or anything like that. So, the Nocturn Industries Manticore. Extremely feature-rich housing. It represents a bit of a generational leap in housing design of what you can get as a consumer. And also, if you're a duty guy, this housing kind of does it all. It's, in my opinion, actually better than some of the issued housings out there right now. And yeah, that's pretty much it. I really can't stop singing the praises of this goggle. It does have some quirks and some caveats, like if you like push-button controls versus knobs, if you like the way the IPD stops work. But overall, as a whole, the Nocturn Industries Manticore-R does provide one of the most complete user experiences for any night vision goggle out there. I absolutely loved my time using these things. If I didn't have to take these apart and build it into another goggle to test in the future, I'd probably use this as my personal set. That's how much I really like them. So there you have it, guys. Manticore-R overview from CHS. You can find this and more on our website. Be sure to like, subscribe, all that YouTube-y stuff. And we will see you on the next one.